Hello, I'm Colleen Gallagher, CEO at Onward and Upward, and you're listening to the Association Insights podcast, where each week we interview association leaders from across the country to hear how they're trying new things, taking big risks, and delivering value for their members. We'll explore the realities of what it means to work in and with associations and bring you the insights and inspiration you need to advance your career and make big changes at your association. Let's get started.
Welcome back to the Association Insights podcast. I'm your host, Colleen Gallagher, and if you've been tuning in as part of the Association 100 audience, you're in the right place. It's the same great content with a fresh new name. We're still bringing you expert perspectives, actionable takeaways, and dynamic conversations to help you elevate your association's communications, advocacy, and leadership strategies. We're wrapping up our February Advocacy series today and really excited for our guest, Gary Shapiro. Gary is an acclaimed author, speaker, and the CEO and vice chair of the Consumer Technology Association, which represents over 1,200 consumer tech companies and owns and produces CES, the global stage for innovation. Over a more than 30-year tenure as head of CTA, he expanded the association's influence and impact alongside the growth of the tech industry. He has also transformed CES, expanding its reach globally. CTA, as many of our listeners know, also holds a very special place in my heart as my first job and the launching pad for my career. So I'm extra excited for today's episode. Gary, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you, Colleen, and I am so honored and pleased to be here, to be on this great podcast, but also to see your great success.
Oh, thanks, Gary. I'm really excited to talk to you because I've seen CTA always at the forefront of advocating for innovation. But there's a lot going on right now, and I would love to hear more about the biggest policy challenges that you all are facing and how you're navigating them.
About all of them. Obviously, this is a great time of change. And change, I think you can view two ways, as terrifying and terrible, because as humans, we like things that are consistent. But change is also an opportunity. And it's an opportunity that opens new doors that perhaps competitors and others don't see, because they're frozen in time and they can't deal with change. And it was a great geneticist that said, it's not the fastest that survive, it's not the strongest that survive, it's those who can adapt the quickest. And if there ever was a time to adapt, this is our time to do it. And especially in the association world as industry and professional leaders, this is our opportunity to stand up and take the big picture and to convince our constituencies and members that this is something that actually can be good. Now, it is scary because change is always scary. That's what humans deal with. We like to keep things the same. But life is about change. And in fact, I have a book about that called Pivot or Die. And it just came out a couple of months ago before the election, but it's been particularly relevant since then. So what we're dealing with is the fact that, look, we've dealt with the Trump administration before. It's somewhat a different cast of players, but not totally. And we found them very easy to work with, actually. They're very approachable. They want to do the right thing. They're committed. And they have a natural slant that wants to favor economic growth. And they understand the business world. So we view all that as a plus. Do we agree with them on everything? Absolutely not. And part of our role is to say we don't agree with you and even do it publicly. And we can't cower. That's our job, to take the slings. So our member companies don't have to, in a sense. We're out there. We have over 1,000 members, and that's what they expect us to do. So we're getting to know them. We're meeting them. We're advocating. We're dealing with a Congress. We recognize it's different. And we try to put things in a language that they will relate to, which is pro-growth. It's anti-inflation. I'll say one thing about President Trump is he really does try to keep his promises as he states them, and he's going through the list of them. So there's not that much he's doing is surprising. Maybe the way he does it is always surprising, and his strategies. But ultimately, you have to assume they have good intentions. And although obviously there's a lot of controversy, but that's what we've done with every president. You congratulate them, you work with them, they're elected, that's part of democracy, and you go with it. And you realize you stick with your principles, and you don't have to. I don't stick with a party. I've never been a party person, so I don't identify that way, because I support politicians who support our cause, which is innovation. And I take that approach. So I don't have the same emotional sense that I think maybe others have. But I think that's beneficial, because I think innovation is great for our country. I think I'm an American. Most of the association, I assume your audience are Americans, are Canadians, and actually Canadians are part of our association as well. We're ahead of Trump on this. My mother's from Canada. I'm half Canadian. I have relatives there. I'd love to see a closer relationship, which isn't existing this second, between Canada and the U.S. So the bottom line is I think we want the best thing for our country and the world, and that's how we approach things.
I really appreciate your take on change because I do think so many of us are in that terrified state right now, but that you have to view it as an opportunity and you have to keep going because otherwise, what's your other option? So I think that's a really good outlook with Trump's second term underway. So, how are you engaging with this new administration? You mentioned some familiar faces, but a new cast of characters as well. How are you approaching them to really advocate for innovation and the different pieces that are going to help the tech sector?
First of all, before they're even the jobs, we look at the ones that are Senate confirmed, and on many we've taken a position on. Uh, a couple we're very concerned about, and we have or will oppose, but several actually we think are really good, and we support them. The Secretary of Transportation, for example, was as a member of Congress. He was the most passionate member of Congress on self-driving vehicles, which we believe in, because they will save lives and empower people and allow a whole new growth of a whole new industry that really, at some point, we just have to do to compete globally. And that had stopped under President Biden, and it was going forward under Obama and Trump won. Some we just embrace. The National Science Advisor and Technology Advisor, great. And we actually coordinate other associations, and we have supported them vocally and visibly. Then in terms of once they're in office, it becomes something where you have a regular routine of making sure they know your positions. And you're nice. You give them a heads up if you're doing something that they may not love. And you also, when you try to support the things they're doing, that you love them, that they're human beings. And if you approach them that way, which has been my whole way of Washington, is recognize the fact you're dealing with people. And just because they disagree with you, they're not evil, they're not bad. They just have a different set of facts. And our job is to try to show the facts that will help our position. And that I always feel good about that because I always believe in our cause. The things we do that I may not believe in or I'm not passionate about, I don't know, I've managed to avoid my entire career. I guess I've been the most lucky person in Washington. I don't know how else to say it, but I really believe what I'm doing. I think innovation is great for the country. We're solving fundamental human problems with technology. And we're working on things where you shouldn't have to go ask the government for permission. And we're competing with China. We're even competing with Europe. And this is what I've written 4 books about and over 1,000 op-eds and articles about, is that we have to, as a country, do certain things. And that's what we're advocating for. It's very consistent with our advocacy goals. And I'm passionate about it. So to me, I don't even view it as work. It's easy in what I want to do. So in terms of our team, we have really good people working for us. We've established relationships over years. They're honest. And we also take an attitude, you might recall, as an association, that we let out the bad news also. We don't lie about or make up our show attendance numbers or things like that. We have an independent audit. If we screw up, we'll say we screwed up. We make mistakes internally and externally, and you just move forward. So I think we have a reputation for advocacy, of being fair, and also having a lot of data to back it up. When we take positions, we do a lot of market research. We survey consumers. We know about what people think, and we have the facts on our industry, which is very helpful because some of the policymakers are very data driven. Some are just position driven. Some there's a combination of the two, and some are just waiting to see what the big person on top thinks, or whoever's running that person thinks. So you have to work all the different angles, and you also have to get support from members of Congress, hopefully on both sides.
Yeah, that research point you made is really huge. And I think that's just something that CTA does so well. And any association that really has success advocating, I think when they can show up for their fly-in days or when they're just working with Congress and they can say, here are the numbers and here's the impact on your constituents, that's a game changer for sure.
Everything, you have to look at what you have as an industry or a professional organizations here. What are your tools? A lot of associations, they have people in every congressional district, especially professional associations. Trade groups, maybe not as, unless you're a realtor organization, or broadcasters do very well at that. Some people, it's all about PAC contributions and raising money. We're okay in that. We're not, that's not the basis. It's one of many tools. One of the things we use that other organizations can do that have events is we try to get politicians or their staff to our big event, especially in Las Vegas. Once they've been to that and seen the dynamism of our industry and met some of the people and see where the world is going, they're just different people. It was very frustrating during the Biden administration how few, especially with the Federal Trade Commission and other agency people, would go and see what the real world is like. We have found Republican administrations seem much more amenable to that. Of course, the media likes to say, oh my gosh, you're going to Las Vegas. Even President Obama, when he was first elected, took a hit at people going to Las Vegas. But the fact is that these convention cities and conventions are business events. They're really hardworking events. Ask anyone like you, when you worked at that event, I wouldn't say you were out there partying. No one of our employees and our exhibitors and our attendees, I'm sure there are some people who are peripheral and maybe have a good time, but generally people are working and learning at those events and they're essential. COVID taught us that. It taught us that face-to-face is so important, not only to convince policymakers and their teams, but also in terms of dealing with our colleagues and employees and getting new ideas and being inspired, and the value of serendipity. And it's also put live face-to-face events, and so including association involvement, on the CEO radar. Even the biggest company CEOs are much more conscious of the importance of a face-to-face encounter. And that's why I know it's easy to run an association, do it just electronically, but the reality of the world is you get those relationships when you're breaking bread with someone, when you're meeting someone you've never met before, when you share something. It's just not the same as being online. Even though I'm the paid cheerleader for technology as a use, I am a face-to-face person.
I hear you. I love in-person connection. There's nothing quite like it. So I get that for sure. Diving into some specific issues here. So I've been following, your team has been really vocal about the impact of tariffs on the tech sector. I know you have some research on this too. At a high level, can you break down those key findings and what these increases could pose for consumer tech prices and products?
Sure. As every business person at the multinational and technology level will tell you, it's just a basic requirement that it's a global world. You get your products from all over the world, including Korea, China, Taiwan, Vietnam, the Philippines. The US is great at chips. We're good at some things, we're not great at other things. We're clearly not winning that battle in the public of convincing people that we benefit enormously as a country in terms of our economy by having global sourcing of products. But it's also dangerous to have sourcing all in one country, especially when that's a country that's a country that is potentially a serious adversity challenge for us, like China. Like if North Korea was producing, or Cuba, or others where or Iran, there's challenges there. So we have to be smart, and we recognize the national security needs of our country. We recognize, and it is going to happen, that more and more products will be made in the U.S., especially for national security purposes, and that makes sense. On the other hand, inflation has been our biggest product. And President Trump realizes that he won in part because President Biden was viewed as causing inflation, and not even realizing the challenges the everyday American family faced when they went to the grocery store. So inflation is an issue where I think the White House and the president are very sensitive to. And they're having trouble reconciling that with imposing additional taxes and tariffs on products. Because a tariff, every economist except those in 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue will tell you it's a tax. And obviously that's going to be paid for by consumers. And even Biden started, at first he denied it, but then he started accepting it. But even Trump people will tell you they understand that. So if there's these tariffs of amazing amounts put on products, whether they're from China or Canada or Mexico or other countries that have been thrown out there, that means that the products will cost more to consumers. And that means for products like smartphones and laptops and tablets and watches and things like that, they will be paying a lot more. Now, obviously, rich people can afford to pay a lot more. Poor people can't. So poor people will be denied the access to essential products if these tariffs are put on at the level that is being talked about. The advantage of our world of consumer technology products is that they've been deflationary for years. So it's maybe tough to notice. Sudden tariffs that are high will be inflationary. And they know it. And it's a game of chicken being played in a large part. It's obviously, as President Trump has said, tariff is his favorite word. It's a negotiating tool. But that doesn't mean that the executives in our industry and aren't concerned and upset. It's just everyone from our members that are retail, like Walmart and Best Buy and Amazon and others, to the major manufacturers, they're concerned. And it's very disruptive, very inconsistent with an anti-inflationary economy. And as we keep getting numbers from our federal officials about where inflation is, we're not winning the battle on inflation. We're not bringing interest rates down. And if we want to succeed as a country, we have to bring those interest rates down. And the way you bring interest rates down, honestly, is by cutting tariffs and cutting inflation. There is another way, though, to bring And we talk about that as well. The other way you could bring inflation and thus interest rates down. And by the way, our national debt is interest rates, is everything there. 5% of $34 trillion is almost $2 trillion a year just on interest, which we weren't paying just 3 years ago. And it's the biggest part of our debt and deficit. It's bigger than our Defense Department spending. And it's a reason that we as an organization do not ask the government for money, which makes our life easier than others. But the other way is actually bringing interest inflation down is through productivity. And productivity comes from technology. And if you make that technology more expensive to buy and to use, you're hurting also productivity. So we think we have a good case to make. That's basically it. But I think it's in the interest of the country to get beyond these trade wars and inconsistency with our allies and focus on a little bit more stability. And that's where I think the Trump administration and I part ways, is that I understand that he has a strategy there. And in many ways, he's been brilliant and helpful. But this is not helpful to the business environment, to the U.S., to the confidence in our economy, to the confidence the world has in us as an ally. And I think we're on a very dangerous path. And it's just not tariffs. It's just the disagreements we're having with our closest allies.
Yeah, I'm curious as you're telling this story, are your member companies able to speak out and say, this is the impact on our company, on our jobs, on money here to or are they really relying on CTA to more aggregate things and speak on their behalf? Or is it a little of both?
I think it's a little of both. Having said that, the best thing that I saw happen when the president was inaugurated, he had 5 of our member tech executives standing behind him at the inaugural. So instead of just beating up on big tech for really, again, we have over 1,000 members, and they talk big tech. They're talking about 3 of them for some things that they may not like, both conservatives and honestly liberals as well. They try to blame them for the ills of society. It's absurd because of all the good they've done around the world, and the services are very low cost and close to free in some cases. I think we have to weigh the benefits and the harm of everything. But the members themselves, especially the big companies, they have lobbyists and lawyers and things like that. But 80% of our members are small startups, entrepreneurs, small businesses, and they're very willing to be vocal and speak up. But a lot of them don't have time. They're just trying to make their payroll.
Running a business. Yeah,
they're trying to run a business, and it's our job to help them. And we've always had a soft spot for the startups and entrepreneurs. The big companies can take care of themselves. They can handle even the big laws. But we look at like some of the things that the administration said, like going to Europe. The last administration encouraged Europe to sue our best companies. They were like, it was unprecedented in my career to see our U.S. government turning on our crown jewel companies. The Trump administration will not tolerate that. They're going to turn that around, and they're going to work. But at the same time, Europe's had a lot of policies which hurt their own companies. And that's what the vice president went and made it clear for the first time, what we've been saying publicly for years, is that the Europeans suffer from their economy and from innovation because they must ask permission for innovation because they have laws which only big companies can deal with. And so the big American companies, to a certain extent, have benefited, but they haven't had too many successful startups there. And we don't want to be like that. On the other hand, China has a very good strategy for innovation, and they don't have privacy rules the way we do. Europeans, all they care about is privacy, not innovation. So we have to be in the middle of that. We have to recognize that we have certain disadvantages in China, especially when it comes to artificial intelligence and data gathering. And we can't be stupid. There are a lot of situations involving privacy, which, like whether your car is about to hit another car, which privacy is not an issue. It's not even an issue when you come across people's medical stuff. If you come upon a massive casualties in a multi-car collision, you want to know who's alive and who's not. That's medical information. So we can't be stupid. In some ways we are. HIPAA as a model has been disastrous for the medical profession. It's not allowed sharing of information. And we now have the ability to figure out what helps people cure basic diseases, and we're not using it because of HIPAA and because there's no way that doctors can communicate or will communicate with each other under present law. We need a national privacy standard. We can't get out there. And to the extent we have national standards, we're more efficient as a country and we could do great things. But that requires leadership. It requires us to be successful as advocates.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to go back to your comment a little while ago about relationships with our allies and tie that into trade policy a little bit, because I know that's another major concern for the tech industry. So I'd love to know your thoughts on the role of international partnerships when it comes to ensuring really resilient and competitive U.S. tech sector.
I've been saying for 2 decades that every company will be a tech company or is a tech company because they need the technology. But even the tech companies themselves, they cannot succeed without relationships and partnerships themselves. Technology and patents and things have gotten so large and so complex. You need to cross-license. You need to have deals with other countries. You need to, like car companies using all the different brands like Bose and others, Macintosh in their cars. It helps sell cars. It helps with what consumers want. They want to have that home environment. So everyone has to cut deals with everyone. That's the bottom line. And those are the skills that our companies are looking for. Can you cut deals? Are you comfortable internationally? And that crosses national borders. Some of the best companies in the world in technology, like Samsung and LG, are Korean. Some are Japanese. Some are now in China. And there are good European companies that have certain technologies that are licensed out. We see them all the time. It's a global business. And Americans, we are already, the number one problem our companies say they have is hiring people, qualified people in the United States. So if we're getting rid of all these immigrants, we're not letting in highly qualified immigrants, and we're putting taxes on our products that are imported, where are these people going to come from, and the factory's going to be, who's going to make the factories, who's going to staff the factories? And then we layer on them all the requirements like childcare and things like that the Biden administration tried to layer on when they did say we need chip factories. It's just, these are not winning formulas for a country to succeed. And I think, obviously, we're in a mixed world now. Some good things are happening and some bad things are happening. What's good things are happening is that we're focusing on getting rid of rules impeding businesses. The bad things that are happening is we're putting up walls around our country and making it difficult. So we need the relationships with other countries. We need to do that, especially those that love democracy and freedom like we do as part of our culture. It's important we be very close to. We may not be heading in that direction this week or next week, but overall, I think in the long term, we'll always be back to facing that we owe our children a better world than we're inheriting. And that requires free market, democratic principles, choice in elections, and some of the things which made this 200-year experiment, or almost 250-year experiment, great in our country. And that's what we fight for.
Yeah, absolutely. So that leads me right into the supply chain, which obviously a big factor, and I think much more on people's radar since COVID, and something just more people pay attention to when all of a sudden they didn't have toilet paper and all of a sudden understood what a supply chain was. So what steps can the US take to secure its consumer tech supply chain without disrupting global trade?
You made a great point. The silver lining of the huge COVID cloud was that all of a sudden Americans learned about supply chains.
Right.
You turn on your faucet and water comes out, and we don't think, or your plumbing works, or things like that happen all the time. And then all of a sudden you're going to the grocery store and there's big missing gaps. And especially, I think it started here with toilet paper. That's more psychology than supply chain. But it did teach us a lot. And it is the job of government to look out and do scenario planning and figure it out. And obviously, it's better to have things locally and closely made. But we are blessed by not only two oceans on our sides, but two countries that are democracies that we were fairly close with, Mexico and Canada. So those are saying we want stuff made in Mexico, which was what we took with the NAFTA and the redo by NAFTA several years ago by President Trump. Is we had a strategy there, and now it's North American strategy. And now it seems to be shrinking to an American-only strategy because an excuse is fentanyl for the most part, and immigration. So I think we'll get common sense at some point, and we'll say Mexico's not a bad place to have things nearby and also have our democratic friends. But supply chain is very important, and it's a role of government not to mess it up. One of the things that we saw that it still is inexplicable to me is the cost of shipping something is so high because there's only 5 shipping companies, and they benefit from this antitrust exemption, which even Democratic Senator Amy Klobuchar won't touch. It makes no sense. It's over 100 years old, and shippers they could set prices super high, and they quintupled them a few years ago. Now, why is that? There's unions which want to be paid a lot of money, and they feel they have a lot of control if these 5 foreign companies have phenomenal profits. And so we have people unloading our ships at ports which are considered not even in the top 50 in the world. We don't have one of the best ports in the world in the top 50 because the prices and the anti-technology atmosphere is so high because of the unions there. So what do I think about supply chain? It's a multifactorial issue that starts with our ports and our unions and our relationships with other countries, and goes on to shipping antitrust exemptions. It goes on to companies being smart and having more than one source of supply as a matter of strategy, thinking out this just-in-time supply chain theory that dominated for the last 20 or 30 years may not be the smartest approach, because occasionally you'll get hit by that tidal wave. of not having a product that you could sell at all for several months. So companies make their decisions. They should stick by them, and their stockholders will benefit. I don't believe the government should bail them out when those decisions are bad, unless the government is the cause of the problem, which increasingly is the problem, is the government won't change bad laws like antitrust exemptions or the fact that we have crazy rules involving shipping, and that we, as a society, have made the decision we want a very educated population. And those aren't the type of people which are going to work in the factories that they envision building here in China. It's those factories will be very highly sophisticated if they're built here and capital intensive and employ very few people. All they'll be like a lot of the Chinese factories, which are very low tech and employ a lot of people. But even that's changing in China, and that's why some companies are actually also moving to Indonesia, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, and elsewhere.
Yeah, that's great insight there. I do want to shift gears a little bit. Anyone who paid any attention to the news coming out of CES this year was everywhere, but you've also got a lot of digital financial technologies, a ton of different emerging innovations, and that's really top of mind for policymakers. So, what role are you all playing in shaping this regulatory landscape for these new technologies? Because I'm sure this is top of mind for you all.
Absolutely. AI is the future. Generative AI is what we're talking about, which is where it's machine learning, and the computers learn from the past and the input, as opposed to your navigational devices, which never learn anything, it seems. And they don't realize the way you like to go home, or unless it's Waze, in which case they get some real-time traffic information. What AI will do is solve fundamental human problems, and that is in healthcare, in driving. Think of collision avoidance, think of healthcare customization. It's also in education, so that learning can be customized for the individual child, and also learn the best ways and what your weaknesses are and focus on those. So there's so many great things from AI. The challenges are it uses a tremendous amount of energy. So we have an energy limitation that we're dealing with now. And the other issue is that because the federal government has not taken a national position, because Congress is paralyzed, there's things like trial lawyers which get involved and they want to keep making their ton of money and taking their VIG and their litigation tax and others. Congress has not really done much. So there's 200 state bills. And that's a problem. It's a problem with a lot of areas where the U.S. should be more efficient. We want to see regulation in AI. We want to know the guardrails that are out there. We don't want to have to go to the government and see ambiguously if our product can be created. We want to know with some certainty that we can go forward in a certain way. Now, the Elon Musk, who called for a 6-month ban on AI when he was a little bit behind, now is more excited about it, that he's doing well, and he has a company, or one of it, or two, or all of his companies have AI features. So we see some optimism now that the Silicon Valley is part of the Trump administration. Again, the vice president gave an amazing speech to a different audience in Europe recently, and he talked about the vision of AI, which is very positive. And he castigated Europe for being so anti-technology. And their approach in AI is beyond cautionary. It's only big companies can afford to do it. It's designed for big companies. We have to make sure that anyone with an idea can see if it works, with safeguards built in for the worst things that could happen. And that's what we're advocating for. And I think we're doing okay. It's just playing whack-a-mole with state legislatures it's a Sisyphean task, and ultimately will be harmful to the U.S. You have it more difficult for the smaller companies to get involved.
Yeah. I'm a huge fan of everything AI, and I think there's so much potential. I love trying and testing new things. So I am thankful for all your efforts and trying to get this out of the state level so that there's not a patchwork of a million different things going on. But I'm excited to see what's to come. I think it's just the potential is endless on this front for sure.
Absolutely. And in the association world, it's especially important because if you're not using AI in your association at this point, you're behind. And I'm not saying we're doing great at it either, honestly. We're not where we should be yet. But we are using it in various ways for marketing for our show, for doing different things. We have a goal for our staff that people be AI trained. I'm on some nonprofit boards that are doing some similar things. AI will actually free us up to do more significant things than do some of the research and reports. It's also an idea factory, frankly, for doing things differently, for testing your marketing, for doing analytics, for so many different things. And talking to companies in the technology world that are using it, it's definitely freeing up people. It's improving productivity, and it'll make a difference in the country. And it is a global battle to see who could do it right. And in some ways it's scary, but the benefits that we could get just knowing when a loved one is very sick with something unusual and death is threatening, you just know that if we just took the human knowledge that's buried on computers out there about how prior people in a similar situation with similar disease with maybe same genetic patterns or other things have been treated, information is just locked up that we have to let out and start making people healthier. It'll cut down on hospital admissions. It'll do all sorts of great things for society.
Yeah. Absolutely. For our listeners who are maybe a little unsure of how to navigate advocacy at the moment, you've been in the advocacy space for decades now. You were again named one of the Hill's top lobbyists last year in 24. What do you see as the most effective strategies for influencing policy when you're in a fast changing political environment?
The advocacy is just relationships in part, in that you are dealing with someone else who you have to assume they have good intentions and they need your help getting the facts. And this, I spoke before a government executive audience recently, and the government workers themselves they're definitely in uncertain times now. But it's also an opportunity. They have the knowledge to make their work and their agencies more efficient and effective, which is what we want as Americans. We all should want that. So they could share what they think should be done, because they'll be the experts, not necessarily people coming in from outside who cut with a very blunt knife. I think there's a lot of things that can be done better. And as Americans, I think we want the best government we could have. It's the same with associations. I think their industry is looking to them and saying, what can we do better in our industry? And this is where it's an opportunity for associations to take leadership. In terms of advocacy, I think honesty is always very good. You should point out the weaknesses in your case and address them, but you should go into your big point about what it is and why you want it and why it makes sense for the country. And when I've been in positions where people are pitching me on something, the things I find annoying, I assume other people would find annoying. Like people telling me why it's in my interest to do what they want me to do. I always find that rings hollow, and it's very clearly seen through. I think you have to address that there are risks to taking a position, but ultimately we're all Americans. We want the best for our country. And to the extent you have a relationship where people trust you on that, and you point out the weaknesses of your argument, I think you'll be better off. And you do have to, nobody can have relationships with 535 congressional offices. But it is good to establish some relationships with certain people in certain areas that are more important to your organization. And sometimes you have to give a little too. Your industry isn't perfect, your profession. And you have to say, some people just oppose everything. I think the trial lawyers, to me, are a good example of that. They just use money and force, and that's what they do. And so all our other businesses pay a tax for that. But I think that it's something that you have to, in a sense, recognize that your industry has to give a little bit for the good of the country. And that's what we should be prepared to do.
Yeah. Well, Gary, these have been such amazing insights, and I so appreciate you sharing your time. Before we let you go, though, today, we like to wrap up all of our podcasts with a little just for fun lightning round section here so our audience can get to know you. So first up is, have you gotten to get away to anywhere fun lately?
I spent last weekend in Florida, which was nice and warm, at my son's soccer tournament. As any parent that does travel sports knows, the hotels are not the ones we may be used to. It's the lowest common denominator hotel. So I wouldn't say it was totally fun. But what's great about that, especially for those that live in the Washington area, that when you're involved with your kids' activities, you get to meet all sorts of very interesting people in the Washington area. Actually, I personally broke the mode of telework because I actually live in Detroit and commute to Washington. So the Detroit people are pretty focused on cars and their sports teams, is what I've learned.
That's great. Too funny. All right. Are you a podcast listener? And if so, is there one you'd recommend for our listeners?
You mean after yours, Colleen?
I'm sure you listen every week.
Believe it or not, I do randoms. And if people send me an email or a text, I'll try theirs out, usually, especially if it's a specific one. I am so variable that sometimes I just ask Siri to give me a podcast that I could do while I'm doing something else. So I do not have a favorite podcast, believe it or not.
All right. That's okay. What's one place in the US that you've never been to but are dying to go?
Oh, I am eager to go. And I had a conference call yesterday and I realized I'd never been to Wisconsin, and I'm visiting an organization there because they've asked me to speak there. So I've been to, I think, most states, and somehow Wisconsin was never there.
Oh, too funny.
I'm looking forward to putting a big piece of cheddar cheese on my head.
That's great. All right, last one. Finish this sentence. When you see me looking at my phone, it probably means that I'm
responding to a text from my wife with something I have to do.
That's pretty accurate. Awesome. All right. Well, again, Gary, thank you so much. Really appreciate having you on the podcast today.
That's a wrap for today's episode. The Association Insights Podcast, previously known as the Association 100 Podcast, is a production of Onward and Upward Marketing and Communications, where our mission is to make associations and nonprofits the go-to source in their industries through earned media and thought leadership. This podcast is an extension of our newsletter, a bi-monthly collection of best practices, top trends, helpful ideas, and smart strategies delivered straight to your inbox. Have you undertaken a big change at your association? Or do you have some words of wisdom from the trenches of association life? We want to hear from you, and so do our listeners. Drop us a note at info@onwardupward.com. That's info@onwardupward.com. Be sure to subscribe, give us a 5-star review, and share with your friends and colleagues. We're available anywhere podcasts are found. Come back next week for more association insights and inspiration. Thanks for tuning in.